One of Donald Trump's top counterterrorism officials resigns in protest over the war in Iran. What does his departure tell us about divisions within the administration over the war, conservatives' relationship with Israel, and the future of MAGA? Well, Carrie Dann is managing editor of the Cook Political Report. That's an independent, nonpartisan newsletter that analyzes American politics. Carrie, welcome, and thanks for joining us. We'll get to the details in a moment, but if you had to sum it up, what, if anything, does this episode surrounding this official, Joe Kent, really tell us about Trump and his supporters, as briefly as you can to begin with?
I think that Joe Kent's departure is maybe a symptom rather than a catalyst for action here. But what we are seeing is he's the first high-profile administration official to publicly break with the president's policy on Iran. He said, "I'm stepping aside. I can no longer justify this." There was not an imminent threat from Iran. It was very interesting to see how he worded his letter to Trump. He sort of blamed the people around Donald Trump and the state of Israel without blaming the president directly for his decision-making here. But it does show that there are starting to be some small cracks in the president's coalition around the way that he has talked in the past about foreign wars. He ran on the idea of avoiding foreign interventionism. That's clearly not what's happening here. And there are starting to be some conservative voices, Joe Kent's among them, that are starting to voice their displeasure there.
All right, let's get into it further. First, by looking at a quote from the resignation letter that Joe Kent, the director of the National Counterterrorism Center, handed in today. Let's have a look. He wrote, "I cannot in good conscience support the ongoing war in Iran. Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation, and it is clear that we started this war due to pressure from Israel and its powerful American lobby." And here is how President Trump reacted to the resignation.
When I read his statement, I realized that it's a good thing that he's out, because he said that Iran was not a threat. Iran was a threat. Every country realized what a threat Iran was. The question is whether or not they wanted to do something about it.
All right, Carrie, to begin with, what should we know about Joe Kent himself?
Well, Joe Kent is a former member of Congress. He was serving as the head counterterrorism official in this capacity. He's a former Green Beret. He's in an interesting political place right now because Democrats agree with his assessment of this being a war of choice that they don't support. But Democrats are also very reluctant to claim him as one of their own. They don't really want to elevate him that much. That's because Joe Kent is primarily known for also being somebody who sort of has peddled in conspiracy theories in the past. Yes, about Israel, but also about January 6th, the 2020 election. So he is somebody who has sort of espoused some of these very right-wing ideals. He had previously been viewed as a very MAGA kind of acolyte. So Democrats are very quick to say, we agree with his assessment just on Iran, but don't take him too seriously, like he's a little bit of a nut. He's very much aligned with Tucker Carlson. The two of them are close. Carlson has come to his defense today, and actually Joe Kent is going to talk to Carlson tomorrow as well to further explain his reasoning here. But he's known as sort of a right-wing person, which is why him breaking with the president is making some waves here in the States.
Let's talk about the first part of Kent's given reasoning in that letter, that Iran posed no imminent threat to our nation. There's broad agreement within the political spectrum with that assertion. Is that fair to say, or is it still sort of unknown?
Well, as of right now, if there was evidence of an imminent threat, the American people are not particularly convinced of that, nor are many of the members of Congress who've been briefed here. I think that there are lots of foreign policy experts and lawmakers who believe that, yes, Iran overall could be an existential threat to the United States. But the idea that that was imminent, the idea that were very close to obtaining nuclear weapons and aiming them at the United States, we haven't really seen a justification from the administration from that. And that's also showing up in public opinion polling. About 2/3 of Americans, when they were asked first by CBS right after this war started, has the administration made a case for what we're doing here? 2/3 of Americans said, no, we're not quite sure what exactly this is all about. Is it an imminent nuclear threat? Is it about regime change? And the administration made very little effort heading into this conflict to build up support with international allies or to make a public case for why this was necessary. So if there is evidence that there was an imminent threat, that certainly is not something that has been shared with folks behind closed doors on Capitol Hill, or that the president has really tried to make a case publicly.
Do you think this puts more pressure on Trump to make that case publicly?
I think it does, but what I think is a little bit problematic for the president is that there was so much different kinds of messaging from different parts of the administration early on. He has also said that he will declare victory sort of when he feels like it, when he senses that there is, that he's achieved his goals. But so far, he's really not stated what those goals are. One thing that is particularly problematic is that Donald Trump could declare victory, say we've done what we wanted to accomplish and we're out of there. But there will be a persistent problem regardless, probably until there is more resolution here when it comes to gas prices, because gas prices are the way that the American public is feeling this, right? They're not necessarily paying that much attention to what's happening on their TV screens, but they are when they go to fill up at the pump, feeling the results of this. Iran has said that they are going to do everything that they can to sort of exacerbate that problem for Donald Trump. So even if he was to declare a victory without really stating what his objectives are, the American people are probably going to still keep feeling the effects of this for weeks to come.
Joe Kent's boss, Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, came out today saying that, hey, the president makes the final call, supporting Trump in that case. But it is likely that there are still rifts within the administration. That's fair to say, including Gabbard herself, many have suspected.
Right. And Gabbard's statement was very, very careful in that she said President Donald Trump is the person who was empowered to make this decision, and he did so. She's also famously anti-interventionist. She's famously a member of the administration who, in past campaigns, has highlighted the fact that Donald Trump did not want to relive the experiences, for example, of Iraq and Afghanistan. And these scars with the American public from those two foreign conflicts and how they became these sort of intractable quagmires is something that she talked a lot about, and that Donald Trump talked a lot about during his campaign over and over. Even in his first campaign, he talked about Iraq and how he would have avoided that conflict and he would have gotten us out of it. And so that's why it's quite jarring, I think, for some conservative commentators to hear him say this was a necessary war. I've chosen that we needed to do this. And it's going to be over quickly is the way that he has argued that. That's what remains to be seen. And I think the longer this conflict goes on, the more unpopular you might see it become with the American public and specifically with Trump's coalition.
Carrie, let's talk about the second aspect of Kent's statement, and that is Israel. First, I want to play a clip of someone who appears to be an ideological ally of Kent's. We've already talked about him, right-wing media personality Tucker Carlson. Here's what he recently said about the war.
This happened because Israel wanted it to happen. This is Israel's war. This is not the United States' war. This war is not being waged on behalf of American national security objectives to make the United States safer or richer. This war is not actually even about weapons of mass destruction, nukes, chem bio. No, this war is waged purely because Israel wanted it to be waged.
All right, that's from a flame-throwing right-wing personality, for those who may not know Carlson. Now, Joe Kent, the intelligence official who we're talking about, he made similar claims in his letter. He blames what he calls Israel's powerful American lobby for U.S. involvement in the current Iran war. He also blames Israel for the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003 and also apparently for the Syrian civil war. We should note that his wife was an American service member who died in a suicide bombing in Syria in 2019. There are, of course, a number of conspiratorial tropes here in this letter. Carrie, how surprised should we be that it's coming from an intelligence official like this?
Well, Kent, as you mentioned, had a long history of being very skeptical of Israel, even linking Israel to the Iraq war and, as you said, to Syria. So I'm not terribly surprised that that was sort of his justification here. And it is something that you've also heard from Tucker Carlson leading up to Kent's departure as well. He said the same thing. I do think that the administration did itself very few favors. Early in the war, Marco Rubio was asked about the timing of these strikes, and he indicated that basically Israel was going to strike regardless of what the United States did. And so the United States joined and participated with them. That soundbite, which he later sort of tried to clean up and said was taken somewhat out of context, but that soundbite became fuel for the fire for these conservative, in some cases agitators, who were very eager to blame Israel for that for the conflict. I will also note that anti-Israel sentiment is not anything new on both sides of the political spectrum, but particularly on some of these far-right commentators. There are many who have had a history of comments that were not only critical of Israel, but also blatantly anti-Semitic. So it's not terribly new to hear some of these commentators take aim at Israel for manipulating the United States. I think what is new is seeing a high-profile intelligence official make that claim as well, even though he has had a history of doing that in the past as well.
You're certainly right. This isn't anything new on both sides of the aisle, as you mentioned. And yet we're seeing right now that these major conservative figures really are at war, or seem to be at war, over the U.S. relationship to Israel. Is this taking on a new dimension that we haven't seen before, where it's shifting really from kind of the furthest, sort of sides of the kind of right-wing sphere to actually much more, if you could even say, mainstream right-wing channels as well? This seems to be a debate that's getting hotter and hotter.
It is. I think it is a little bit early to tell. In the data, you do see that esteem for Israel and trust for Israel in the United States has been on the decline, but that has almost entirely been driven by Democrats and independents. Recent polling from NBC News shows that now a majority of Democrats say that they view Israel unfavorably, 57%. That's a big change from even 3 years ago. That's a major increase. When you look just at Republicans, favorability for Israel still remains fairly high. It's about more than half, about 54% of Republicans say that they view Israel in a positive light. They're also much more likely to say that they sympathize with Israelis over Palestinians in that conflict in Gaza. So you're not seeing a dramatic fall off among Republicans, either in their esteem for Israel or, by the way, in their approval rating for what the president is doing. You're not seeing big swaths of the Republican coalition saying we are actually giving Donald Trump a thumbs down for what he's trying to do in Iran. His approval rating on the issue is, I think, in the high 80s%. So his voters are still sticking with him on this. And there's obviously a long history of Republicans, particularly the evangelical community, having a strong alliance and being very strongly in favor of Israel's security. I don't think that's going anywhere for right now, but you are starting to see it kind of creep from the far, far edges of the right into a slightly more mainstream position here. But as of right now, this remains the folks who are really on the right side of the spectrum, far to the right of even Donald Trump.
I mean, to be fair, we've seen polls showing that younger conservatives are more likely today to have negative views about Israel. So this does seem to be something that's changing within the Republican Party. What's behind this rift? Is there an old guard Republican opinion on the U.S. relationship with Israel in terms of policymaking, and one that's changing radically within younger echelons?
Well, that's right. And it's not just younger conservative, it's younger Americans across the board who are more skeptical of Israel. Voters under 35 are the most likely to say that they have a negative view of them. And that correlation increases with age. Seniors are the most likely to have a positive view of Israel. I think so much of that has been influenced by the images that these younger voters have seen coming out of that conflict in Gaza, the sort of drumbeat of the really tragic situation happening there. And that's also combined with, younger voters may not have as much history or understanding of the U.S. relationship with Israel over time, and why that has come to be such an alliance that is one of the defining ones of the modern age in America.
All right, Carrie, I want to play another clip for you, this time from the influential podcaster Joe Rogan, someone who threw his support to Trump before the last election. Let's take a listen.
It seems so insane based on what he ran on. I mean, this is why a lot of people feel betrayed, right? He ran on no more wars and these stupid, senseless wars, and then we have one that we can't even really clearly define why we did it.
Well, but he said he's against endless wars.
Well, they're
running
all,
against endless wars.
Listen, man, they're all endless.
All right. Joe Rogan there, very influential American podcaster, talking about the Iran war. When we listen to those comments by Rogan made a few days ago, we see its echo in that letter by Joe Kent, this intelligence official who has just announced his resignation. Just to come back to this, there is a widening rift among figureheads that are important to MAGA, even if Joe Rogan wouldn't call himself necessarily MAGA. Is it reflected in MAGA itself, in voters, Trump voters?
As of right now, again, this is even a segment in some of the public polling that's been done since this conflict broke out. Not just looking at how Republicans view the war in Iran, but how Republicans who affiliate themselves with the MAGA movement and Republicans who don't. And actually, support for the conflict in Iran is higher among Republicans. Even higher than it is among the Republican Party as a whole. When Donald Trump tweeted the other day, used a message on Truth Social to say, I decide what MAGA means, he's not incorrect in the way that his coalition, his voters, have been reacting. So far, even though you are seeing these high-profile conservative commentators starting to sour on the president's policy here, we aren't seeing it in voter behavior yet, but that isn't to say that the makings of a major rift aren't happening. I think two things could happen to make that rift much wider. One would be if the Republican Party is looking at $5 gas prices over the summer. I think that would be something that voters would view as really a betrayal, because not only did Donald Trump promise not to engage in these foreign wars, he also said he was going to focus on affordability. And if voters are saying, I'm having to pay every time a huge sum every time I want to fill up my car, I think there will be blame placed on the administration. And the other thing that could happen is the idea of boots on the ground. In no part of any of the Republican coalition, MAGA or otherwise, is there wide support for the idea of actually deploying troops in the region. I think if Trump was to do that, you really could see the bottom fall out of the MAGA coalition. As of right now, we're not seeing it show up in polling, but sometimes these conservative influencers can be a leading indicator of where public opinion may go.
In other words, this seems to reinforce the idea that MAGA really is built around Trump, no matter what he does. Isn't there, however, a fight for post-Trump MAGA? And we're already seeing these kind of alliances or these kind of positionings that sort of point to what happens in the future.
That's right. And it's a really interesting moment for two of his potential successors, J.D. Vance, the vice president, and Marco Rubio, the secretary of state. Vance really positioned himself as when he was Donald Trump's running mate, as I support him because of this very thing. He says he's not going to engage in foreign wars. There's been a lot of reporting of him being somewhat skeptical of Trump's decision to launch these attacks in Iran. Marco Rubio has historically been more hawkish and has been more sort of out front on that. And so you're seeing some jockeying between the two men, and Donald Trump even sort of throwing his favor behind one or another when he's asked about this conflict. But that is a place where you could see that divide acting out in 2028. As far away as that seems, whether or not we are still talking about this conflict in 2028 is certainly a black box. We don't know the answer to that question, but you are seeing the divide in two of Trump's potential successors, and he has not really thrown his weight behind one or the other as of now.
Joe Rogan is a very influential individual within American politics. He's become that way. Obviously, the Republicans very happy to have that endorsement. Before the last election, if he doesn't represent the MAGA opinion on this, then who does he represent? Is it independents that Trump and his coalition desperately need?
Yeah, and Rogan hasn't been as explicitly political as, say, a Tucker Carlson or a Megyn Kelly. He was sort of viewed as this person who was not apolitical, but was not. He was sort of representative of these voters who maybe don't always participate, might not always pay attention. He is very influential, especially with young men who ended up turning out for Donald Trump and in making up a huge part of Donald Trump's coalition when he won in 2024. That endorsement, I think, was very important because it was a way in for some of these disaffected voters to decide, hey, I am going to show up to the polls because my vote is going to make a difference. So I don't think he speaks for MAGA, nor would he say that he does. And in fact, I think has been frustrated with how politicized his own role has become. But he is especially tuned into where younger voters, where especially young men are, and especially young men who maybe are not that inclined to participate in the political process, but had an entree to do so because Rogan endorsed Trump and was very outspoken at the time when he did so.
And Carrie, just sort of wrapping up, polls show that a majority of Americans are against the war in Iran, or at least polls taken so far. What ultimately does all of this infighting mean? I mean, is it a tempest in a teacup when you have a president whose foreign policy tends to be very sort of erratic or sort of impulsive anyways?
I do think that it remains to be seen a little bit how Iran is going to influence the conservative bloc as a whole. Donald Trump's standing, as you're absolutely correct, it is not a popular war. It's about at a 2-to-1 opposition as of right now with the American public. That also hasn't changed a lot in the last few weeks. We've actually had some pretty high quality polling over the past two weeks looking into this, and you are not seeing a huge erosion in Trump's approval rating. You aren't seeing people rapidly turning against the conflict. I think the number one thing that's going to matter is how long it goes on. Trump painted this from the beginning as like this was going to be a pretty quick strike. You are now seeing the administration update that timeline in real time. Early on, the people who approved of this operation also were very optimistic that it would be short. Those who thought that it would be long and drawn out were very much in opposition. The longer it goes on, the more these potential rifts, both within the Republican Party and the popularity or unpopularity of the war overall, are going to continue to increase. And then obviously as casualties increase, that is sometimes when voters get plugged in to realize, oh, this is having a cost to America, and at what cost and at what benefit. For the United States, which a majority of voters in 2024 opted for a candidate who said they wouldn't get the United States involved in a conflict like this.
All right, Carrie Dann is managing editor of the Cook Political Report. That's an independent, nonpartisan newsletter that analyzes American politics. Carrie, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, to our viewers, we ask, what do you think? Let us know in the comments. And if you like this video, please do hit that like button. And of course, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe. From all of us here, thanks for watching.